let's get at it. Again, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in tonight. A number of friends have asked me about what's happening, the Israel-Palestine, Gaza, Hamas issue. And I thought maybe the best way to do is to have an open conversation. So you've been invited to bring your questions, and I hope you will bring your questions as we carry on this evening. And I'll be helped by Grafton Ross, who's the vice chair and head of research for OFIP. So thank you so much. I'll just start off with a quick land acknowledgement. I'm broadcasting here from Ottawa on unceded Indigenous territory in Ottawa. I know some of you who are on listening, watching tonight, but I don't know all of you, and I know that there's not everybody has the same level of knowledge about this issue. So with your forbearance, particularly with the permission of those who know quite a bit about it, I'd like to spend the first 12 minutes giving a little bit of background that I think will be helpful to understand the issue. I'm using a PowerPoint presentation. It lasts about maybe 13 minutes. And then we can get into the questions. And while I'm talking, please use the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A to put questions in there. And I'm going to try to field as many of them as I can. Grafton will, as head of research, will certainly help me from time to time, and I'm looking forward to that. He's also sort of going to keep an eye on the questions that come in and maybe bunch a couple together. So they may not be the words that you use, but hopefully the issues that you're worried about or concerned about we'll address. So I'm going to start off now with a little presentation, which I hope will be useful to you. So this is, here we are at 7:33 or something. And let me just say that where I think the best place to start is with this statement, this remarkable statement by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the UN Security Council, saying that the attack by Hamas on October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. He was roundly attacked by Israel for that. In fact, Israel did not get, but demanded his resignation, wanted him to retract it. So what was Gutierrez referring to? He explained it a bit in his speech. He talked a bit about the years of occupation, of settler violence, of confinement in Gaza. But Israel, of course, prefers to see this as a one-off only on October 7th. And I thought it might be useful to spend a few minutes just talking about how we got to where we are now. And I think we could go back as far back in history as we want, but I think in the 12 minutes I have, I'd like to start with the Holocaust. That terrible, terrible event, which will cause the death of 6 million Jews, almost wiped out European Jewry. And post-World War II, there was an issue that arose, and that is what to do with the Jews. And it was complicated by the Western countries, including Canada, because we didn't want them here. And Canada has a very sad history of anti-Semitism, which we're all aware of. We refused to allow some of those Jews who were trying to get asylum in the St. Louis. We also, that phrase, none is too many, referred to Jews trying to immigrate to Canada. So we felt very badly about what happened in the Holocaust, but at the same time, we didn't want them to come here. And so Canada embraced the Zionist idea, which was that Jews should go to Palestine and that European Jews should be given part of Palestine to make a state. And that notion was put forward by a number of countries, including Canada, and including by our ambassador to the UN at the time, who was Lester B. Pearson. Now, that UN proposal was adopted by the UN in November 1947. It was proposed by a committee of 11 states that were members of the UN Special Committee on Palestine, including Canada. And it proposed that about 55% of then Palestine be given over to make a Jewish state for new Jewish refugees from Europe. Now, if you look at the map here, you see the whole orange and yellow is what was British Mandate Palestine. And the proposal by the UN was to give the orange part over to European immigrant Jews, and the yellow, leave the Palestinians to have the yellow part, which you see includes up here, up around Nazareth, includes what basically became the West Bank, Gaza, and that area down there. Now, there was a problem with this idea because there were already 1 million Palestinian Arabs living in Palestine, all over Palestine. And there were only about 500,000 recently arrived European Jews, and none of them spoke Arabic. Now, those European Jews, if they wanted to have a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, they had a problem because the majority were Palestinians. They had several options. They could have tried to kill all the Palestinians, but they would have lost public international support in doing that. They could, of course, try to bring more Jewish immigrants from Europe, but that was not something that could happen very quickly. That would take time. So the option that was left to them was they had to expel the Palestinians, which they did. Now, and that was a violent process. There were many massacres. The Palestinians resisted, but in the end, they were expelled. And that process is what the Palestinians today call the Nakba, or disaster. It basically took place between November 1947 and August 1948. Now, if you look at the map on the left-hand side, you don't really need to know exactly where those arrows are going. What you can see, it was chaos. Zionist militias were scaring people. People were fleeing north to Lebanon, fleeing to Syria, fleeing over into what became the West Bank. And a lot of people fled down into Gaza. And that's why it's important for our story tonight. And so Gaza became the largest concentration of Palestinian refugees. Since then, in successive wars, Israel has continued to expand, taking over more and more Palestinian land. The white areas here in the first panel were where Jews had bought land before 1948. That the middle one was the UN proposal. Then after some fighting, that was expanded. Israel was expanded to this, and now these represent the areas A and Gaza, and here's Gaza down here. So the amount of land that the Palestinians control keeps shrinking and shrinking. Now, Palestinians have resisted this dispossession from the very beginning in many different ways. At first, they tried some military resistance. There were fighters that snuck back across the border to try to recapture their land. They also appealed to Arab nations for help, appealed to Nasser. They appealed to the UN. There's a picture of Mr. Arafat at the UN. Of course, there were demonstrations. They called for a boycott, you know, the BDS that you've heard of, the International Boycott Campaign. And of course, there was terrorism that we hear a lot about, but to none avail. In the end, Israel was too strong, and it had the backing of Western countries, including Canada. And so the Palestinians were continually losing ground, backing off year after year. Organizationally, the Palestinians had several organizations. There was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was headed by Yasser Arafat, who I'm sure you've all heard of. There are other political parties like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. There was Fatah, which Mahmoud Abbas is now the head of. There was the Islamic Jihad, or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and there was Hamas. And that brings us to our situation today. So what is Hamas? Well, Hamas is a Palestinian political party. The word Hamas actually is the Arabic version of Islamic Resistance Movement, HMS in Arabic. It was formed in 1987 during the first Intifada, and it was a very strict religious organization. Ironically, Israel encouraged the development of Hamas at the beginning, because Hamas was religious, whereas Yasser Arafat's organization was secular. And so Israel found it helpful to have two organizations competing at the time. And Hamas's aims was to liberate all of Palestine, including all of modern-day Israel, and establish a new state based on Islamic principles. Now, the first Hamas covenant you've probably heard of, it called for armed struggle and included statements that were, to my view, and I think all of us on the call tonight, were clearly anti-Semitic. Article 13 was the call for armed struggle. says there is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad, that is to say, struggle. And all initiatives of international conferences and so on are a waste of time. So only armed struggle. And Article 22 had this remarkable statement on the worldwide power of Jews. It said the Jews were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution. With their money, they formed secret societies, such as Freemasons, Rotary clubs, the Lions, and others in different parts of the world for the purposes of achieving Zionist interests. I think today those kinds of remarks are not only wrong and racist, they're even a bit laughable. But in 2005, Hamas changed its strategy. It gave up the notion that only armed struggle would be the way to regain its land and its country. And so it announced that it would engage in Palestinian elections, which were scheduled for 2006. Western countries, including Canada, sent international observers to oversee the elections. And Hamas's slogan was reform, in opposition to the alleged corruption of the Abbas Palestinian Authority. Now, to the surprise of Israel and surprise of the Bush administration had this strong promotion of democracy campaign going on, so it encouraged the elections. But to their big surprise and dismay, Hamas won the elections. They didn't just win in Gaza, they won everywhere. So if you see on the map on the right-hand side, the kidney-shaped organization description there is the West Bank, and you can see that almost all of the ridings or areas are in green, therefore they're won by Hamas, a few yellow, and the Gaza is down the bottom left-hand corner. 1, 2, 3, 4 went to Hamas, and 1 went to Fatah. So the Israel and the Bush administration were shocked. I think they were embarrassed that they had promoted this and it hadn't worked out the way they wanted, but they decided they would refuse to accept the results of the election. And so they allowed President Abbas, who had been elected earlier, they had different elections. They had an election for president and an election for the legislature. Abbas was already in as president. They allowed Abbas to continue to rule by decree, which in fact he has done for the last 15 years. So after the elections, here you can see on the left-hand side, you can see the distribution of seats. Had the legislature ever been convened, it would have been a very large majority of Hamas and a significant minority of Fatah. But that legislature was never convened, and many of the Hamas candidates in the West Bank were arrested, and some are still in prison today. But Abbas, though he had the backing of the West, wasn't able to take over Gaza, where Hamas was particularly popular. So what's the situation today is that Abbas and the PA controls the West Bank, and Hamas controls Gaza, and that's the way it's been for the last 15 years. Partly, I think, looking at the challenge it had in its lack of success, not a lack of being able to be accepted, having won the election, Hamas rewrote its charter. And the new charter got rid of that silly, crude, anti-Semitic language of the earlier document. The new charter specified that the fight is against the Zionist takeover of Palestine, not against Jews or because of their religion. It downplayed a little bit the Islamic or religious nature of Hamas, but it retained its right to use military force. Now, I remember Patrick Martin, the former Globe and Mail correspondent, thought at the time this new charter was a significant step and that Canada and Israel should take note of it and look at entering into discussion with Hamas. But Israel decided it wasn't significant. So how has Gaza been under Hamas government since 2006? Well, it's about 2 million people. They've been held captive in an outdoor prison, 360 square kilometers. It's about 15% of the Ottawa territory. I'm not a runner, but it's about, from one end of Gaza to the other is about the length of a marathon, about 40 some kilometers, and it's about 5 or 6 kilometers wide. It's surrounded by this huge impenetrable fence. This was the best picture I could get of it. It has barbed wire. It has military outposts every couple of kilometers. It has police. It has cameras everywhere. And it's very difficult to get through on purpose. And by the way, Israel also blocks Palestinians from coming in from the sea. They're only allowed, the Palestinian fishermen can go out 3 kilometers to catch fish. And if they go farther than that, they will get shot by the Israeli Navy. And just to finish it, they also had an airport here which was bombed by Israel. So Gaza was really completely cut off, except when Israel would allow them to exit through the Erez crossing here or through the Rafah crossing down the bottom here, which is the one we've been talking about where Canadians have been escaping from Palestine, from Gaza in the last couple of days. So it's very poor. The average income is somewhere around $3,500 US. 2/3 of the people are refugees. They're not from Gaza. Their main demand is they want to go back. And in fact, some of the people can look out over the wall here and see the lands where they were expelled from, see other people working their lands. But they themselves are stateless. They're not a citizen of any state. They don't have a passport. And as a matter of fact, it's very difficult for them to get out. And most of them are children. About 40% are under 25 years of age. So what about the Hamas structure and its strength? Well, it has members all across Palestinian society, not just in Gaza. It has members in Israel, members living in Jerusalem and the West Bank. Of course, in the West Bank and in Israel, they have to be underground because they can very rarely show themselves. Here's an exceptional time when Palestinians inside were flying the Hamas flag. This is from a picture from the Times of Israel, where these people were chanting, "We are all Hamas." But Hamas has become the most powerful Palestinian resistance organization. Abbas's organization has been more or less tamed. And so for Palestinians, Hamas is seen as the main organization to face the Israelis. And for that reason, for Israel, Hamas has become enemy number one. When Hamas was created, the PLO was the enemy number one, and Hamas was seen as a distractor that Israel encouraged. Now the tables are reversed, and Hamas has become enemy number one for Israel. Its internal structure is unknown, its total membership is unknown, but the CIA fact book estimates that the military wing has between 10 and 15,000 operatives. And I'm not exactly sure what an operative is, but I guess it means like the equivalent of a soldier. It also forms the government in Gaza. So it provides normal government services, education, health, police, water, sewer, electricity, and so on and so forth. So having been unsuccessful electorally, Hamas undertook another initiative, and that was the Great March of Return in 2018. Now, this was massive, peaceful civil disobedience. Tens of thousands of Palestinians came to the wall, to the border. This picture here on the bottom is taken from the Israeli side. And they were met with Israeli violence. They were met with snipers. This little black tent here is where snipers were shooting people. And these people had calculated that massive civil disobedience, kind of like Gandhi in India, would force Israel and the West to change the discourse. But they were completely wrong. Israel shot and killed 205 of the people, and more than 20,000 were injured enough that 20,000 people were injured, including 11,000 who had to go to hospital. So here is Hamas's strategic dilemma today. The Palestinian refugees in Gaza want a solution. They want an end to the blockade, end to the siege, and the right to return to their property, their lands. Every year, the conditions in Gaza are getting worse and worse. The UN declared in 2021, that Gaza would be unlivable in 2022. And what does unlivable mean? It means that the water is undrinkable. It's very salty. It means that the sewers are uncontrolled. There's intermittent electricity. The land is being polluted. There are food shortages and so on and so forth. And this has caused a very high toll on the Palestinian population. There are enormous health issues. Most of the people in Gaza are sick. They're sick physically, and many of them are sick mentally as well from the stress that they're living in. The problems that the Palestinians face are not only in Gaza, they're also in the West Bank. I told you that Hamas has members in the West Bank, and they see there Israeli settlements continue to grow, and that the PA under Abbas doesn't or can't oppose the growth of the settlements. So what they see is that Israel appears invincible, and the world seems to be leaving the Palestinians to die in a perpetual prison. And they've learned from experience that democracy doesn't work or isn't allowed to work, and the peaceful civil disobedience doesn't work. So where does that leave them? They can't give up because the problem facing the people of Gaza remains. It won't be resolved until either the Palestinians are all killed by the Israelis. That's one option. Or as long as the people of Gaza exist in the Palestine, they want an end to the blockade and a right to return. So Hamas needed a way to find, to make the world, to bring this to the world's attention. You could call it die fighting or die not fighting. But that's the backstory to the terrible events of the breakout that took place on October 7th. So, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't go on too long there. I tried to give a back summary so that everybody would have a common denominator, a common basic. And now what I'd like to ask you to do, please, is put your questions in the Q&A so that we can look at them and try to respond to your questions. And I encourage you to do a couple of things. Ask the hardest questions you can. There's no point in throwing, what's the right words, or puffballs, right? There are some very difficult moral issues that need to be addressed here, both on what Hamas did at the October 7th and what Israel is doing now and what the future is like, the role of the United States and the role of Canada. So, Grafton, have you got a question there?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, for that background. Can you hear me well?
I can, yes.
There are questions coming in. I encourage more to come in the Q&A. We're not monitoring the chat for questions, although I will post links in there if there are some that are relevant. First question I'd like to ask, Peter, is what do you feel are Israel's goals? What is Israel trying to achieve here?
Well, first of all, I'll go by what they say they're trying to achieve. The Israelis say that their objective is to eliminate Hamas. They want to kill, stomp, get rid of Hamas, and that's what they're trying to do. That's what Israel says, and I'm sure that's true. Whether or not that's the only thing they're trying to do is another question. It would seem to me that Israel is going much beyond trying to kill Hamas. They are carrying out a massive bombing campaign on the Palestinian population of Gaza. The Gaza has been a thorn in the side of Israel for many years because it is the biggest concentration of refugees. And I think Israel would like to force the population of Gaza, certainly the population of northern Gaza, to move south, perhaps to try to move them out completely into Egypt, like they've done with the other refugees. There are 5 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan and in Syria and in Lebanon, quite apart from the refugees who are in the West Bank. So it would seem that probably what the Israelis are hoping for is another successful Nakba. Now, when the Nakba took place in 1947-48, Israel was racing against a time clock. They knew that they didn't have complete freedom to push as far as they want, and they ended up signing a declaration of some armistices with various Arab countries. I think the same thing is going here. Israel knows that it doesn't have unlimited time to push out the Palestinians, so that's why I think it's bombing so aggressively now. It's racing against time. We know that the G7 has just started to make a statement. The United States is now talking about a several-day pause. The Organization of Islamic States are meeting next weekend. I think the resistance to what Israel is doing is rising, and I think Israel wants to get as much done as possible before they're stopped.
Quick follow-up. Do you think it's even possible to eliminate Hamas? Do you think it's possible to eliminate armed resistance, even if they were expelled into the Sinai, into Egypt, as you suggest?
Well, the first thing is that I think most observers agree that they won't really be able to get rid of Hamas per se, that the 10-year-old boy whose older brother has been shot during this round, in 5 years is going to be 15 years old, or in 10 years he's going to be 20 years old, and he's going to remember what Israeli forces did to his brothers. So I think Hamas at that level is it's both a political party and an incarnation of an idea, the idea of return, the idea of resistance, the idea of ending the siege. And so even if every single Hamas leader were killed, I think that might cause a pause for a short while. I think the urge to rise up is permanent. Now, it is true, I think, that if they were able to force the Palestinians, the majority of the Palestinians, to move to Egypt, then they would be 20 or 30 kilometers farther away, and that would give Israel more breathing room. But I don't think it will solve the problem. I think Hamas will just, or the replacement of Hamas will have to adapt to new circumstances. I don't think, as long as this issue is not addressed, I don't think Israel is in the clear.
Thank you. Question. Given that Israel is blocking all kinds of help, however, the Islamic Relief of Canada is gathering some money to send to Gaza. Will the money find its way to Gaza? Is this or more generally, is there a way of sending financial aid to Gaza?
Right now, the control over any aid that goes in has to go through the Rafah gate, which is the border between Egypt and Gaza, and that is tightly controlled by Egypt under the control of the Americans and the Israelis. So I don't think there's any independent way. Didn't someone say a plane landed? I'm not sure, but in terms of the amount of money that needs to go in, I think it all depends on what happens at that border, and what happens at the border is a political decision rather than a military decision. So I think the effort right now has to be on forcing Canada and pushing other countries to demand the immediate entry of humanitarian aid. I think the humanitarian aid will flow in. In fact, I'm told that 100 trucks are waiting to get in. It's the blockage is Israel doesn't want them again, and America is supporting Israel.
Thank you. The questioner says, tonight on CBC News, Margaret Evans, who the questioner says they deeply respect, Margaret Evans said that Hamas does not recognize Israel's right to exist. That has often been repeated by the media. But I've also read that Hamas changed its constitution, and I think you alluded to that, Peter, to seek a Palestinian state within the 67 borders, thus implicitly recognizing Israel. Which is it?
I actually think it's both. It is true that Hamas offered a truce, I think a long-term truce based on the 67 borders. So that's true. But I also think that their base wants the right to return, and I don't think they're going to be able to live on a long-term basis, accepting the fact that Israel is a Jewish state, and therefore the people who live in Gaza don't have the right to return to it. Because if they were to return, then there would no longer be a Jewish majority. Right now, in the total area that was Palestine, Jews and non-Jews are roughly equal, about 6.5 million each in that whole area. What Israel has done is pushed about 3 million Palestinians into the West Bank and 2 million into Gaza. And as a result, what's left, Israel has a very large Jewish majority.
Next question. Some claim that the phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, a phrase which we've heard in various kinds of demonstrations here in Canada. Some claim that that phrase is anti-Semitic. A person in Calgary is reported to actually have been arrested for chanting this phrase. What does this phrase mean, and is it anti-Semitic in your view?
Well, why don't you answer that one, Grafton? You want to take a crack at it?
Yes, I will try. I will just turn on my video. I would say first, we need to reflect on this moment where it's it's about it's really a cry for freedom and self-determination of the Palestinian people within their homeland. And that's how it's understood, I think, at demonstrations that we see here in Canada. Now, it's obvious, it's evident that different people will have a different understanding of what that phrase means. But in my view, it's a phrase that is related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. It is not related to Jews as a people and is therefore not anti-Semitic.
Okay. Got another question?
Sure. And please keep them. Oh, I see a lot are coming up.
By the way, take a look. I'd encourage you. I'm not looking at that list. You are, Grafton. But if you see people who feel that either my or your answers aren't sufficient, please flag that, because I'm happy to have people disagree. In fact, I want people. No, I don't want people to disagree, but I want people who do disagree to express their disagreement so we can discuss it a bit.
Next question. Where is Canada in this dispute? And I guess I would add to that, where should Canada be?
Well, Canada has supported supported the project of the creation of a Jewish state in 1947. We were one of the proponents of it. Canada, and then we turned a blind eye when the new state of Israel started expelling Palestinians, even though that was not part of the resolution. We've turned a blind eye on what Israel has done repeatedly. When, for example, there was that election in 2006, we did not say, well, hey guys, we believe in democracy, that should work. No, we followed Israel and the United States in saying Hamas cannot be part of that government. We officially say we're in favor of a two-state solution, but as Israel has been expanding its settlements, we have really not said anything very significant. So the fact that Canada is being quite quiet now is quite in character. Canada has basically followed the US position. We've supported the notion of a Jewish state, and we have seen how the expansion of that Jewish state has been done to the detriment of the Palestinian people, even though they had nothing to do with the Holocaust. This was imposed on them by the UN. So what Canada is doing so far, I think, really is basically not very much. Trudeau is doing the minimum he can. We are trying to bring out the Canadians who are stuck in Gaza, and that's fine. But we have really not played a very significant role. And frankly, we don't have a lot of leverage there either. So Canada doesn't really, even if Mr. Trudeau were determined to do something, really the best he could do would be to tell Mr. Biden and tell the world we don't agree with what Israel is doing.
Fun fact, Canada also had general elections in 2006. In fact, 3 days after the election that Hamas won, Stephen Harper's Conservatives actually had they won with a lower percentage of the popular vote
than Hamas
did. Okay. Hamas got 46. I think the Conservatives here got 43%.
Did Hamas recognize the Harper government?
They did, as did the rest of the world.
Right.
Next question. Knowing that Israel has always tightly controlled anything coming into Gaza by air, water, and land, how has Hamas been able to maintain its arsenal, and for how much longer?
Honest to God, I don't know. I wouldn't know who to ask. I don't know. There's some people argue, and I think there is some plausibility to this, that Mr. Netanyahu in particular has found it useful to have Hamas continue to be a thorn in the side, to be continually sending relatively ineffective rockets into Israel, because it provides a convenient enemy that allows him to come to America and ask for help. I don't see how. I know that the seacoast is entirely blocked by the Navy. I know that the airport has been bombed. To get to Gaza, any missiles or armaments have to either come through Israel or come through Egypt. And so I don't know how they do it, but they seem to. I think a lot of the rockets that they have, for example, are homemade and not particularly effective. That I was in 2008, I was near Gaza and I was under an attack by Hamas rockets, and they were about as powerful as a hand grenade. If they had landed on my car, no doubt I would have been killed. But if they landed 200 meters away, they didn't really do very much, which I think is one of the reasons why throughout all this 10,000 Hamas rockets have been sent into Israel, I have yet to see a single picture of an Israeli building destroyed. I don't think they have anything like the destructive capability of the bombs and missiles that Israel is using.
The next questioner asks, I've heard that Hamas does not care about Palestinians and that they're just fighting for power and that they use Palestinian civilians as human shields. True or false?
Well, let's see. The Palestinians polls before somewhat before October 7th, maybe a month before, showed that Hamas had somewhere around 20% support in Gaza. I think a lot of people don't particularly like, they're not happy with Hamas as a government. They're not happy with sewers and water and electricity and all sorts of problems they have. But there is widespread support for the notion. Hamas incarnates the notion of resistance and return. If Hamas were to say tomorrow, well, we give up. We can't win. We give up. Public support for Hamas would, I'm sure, evaporate. And some other party, the most obvious candidate is PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, would grow. I'm sure of that. So in general, while the Palestinian Authority is widely seen as being venal and corrupt, that's not the reputation that Hamas has in Gaza. I find it notable, for example, we've seen lots of interviews of people in Gaza. We've seen lots of interviews even of people now coming out of Gaza, and I don't hear them complaining about Hamas. They're not saying Hamas has brought this down on us. They're talking about the Israelis. So I'm sure there's some Hamas people who are skimming, of course. But if they did that very widely, they would lose the popular support that they have. And I would bet my bottom dollar that if you did a survey of Palestinians today, there'd be wide support for Hamas because it's seen as the only organization that is fighting to regain the territory, to defend their land. Whereas the Palestinian Authority today is largely seen as being ineffectual and maybe even corrupt. So are they just doing it for their own, or are they doing it for their people? You'd have to to decide. What I do know is that it is true that they fire their rockets from all over the place, and it's easy for the Israelis to say, well, they're hiding amongst the population. But if you turn it around, that's what the British said about the American revolutionaries. They weren't wearing uniforms. They were hiding amongst the population and shooting at the British soldiers. This is classic guerrilla warfare, where the Taliban are the same. They have the support. They have to have support from the population, or they can't continue to exist. So I don't think this notion that has been presented to us that Hamas is some kind of nocive organization that's been imposed on the Palestinians. It's come to the Palestinians out of their experience.
Thank you. As you were speaking there, I just looked up the poll results. Those polls were taken in the first week of September of this year, so a month before the breakout. If parliamentary elections were to have been held at that time, Fatah would win 36% of the vote to Hamas's 34%.
Oh, okay, so it's closer than I thought. Yeah, okay. And that was
But
that in Gaza, Grafton, or is that all over?
that's overall.
Okay,
It's broken down, but I don't
okay,
have
that's
that in
fine. I
front
just
of it.
wanted to, yeah, okay.
Um, Hania, who is a Hamas leader, would win presidential elections over Abbas,
Mm.
58% to 37.
And,
Um,
and my sense is that would not change now. That in fact, if
mm,
anything, it would probably go up because what's happening in the West Bank now is the settlers are on a rampage. They're attacking Palestinians. There's
mm.
been something like 140 Palestinians killed in the West Bank since the beginning of October, and the Palestinian Authority either is unwilling or unable to protect the Palestinians there. So people look at the two and say, um, yeah.
And in terms of armed resistance, that same poll revealed that 58% of Palestinians, this is overall, support uh, resolving to armed confrontations in order to break the current deadlock.
And you know, the
So,
Canadians find that shocking. And sometimes I hear people say, Grafton, why don't the Palestinians resist peacefully, right?
mhm,
But when you look at their history, when they get elected, the elections are denied. When they do peaceful civil disobedience on a massive scale, they get massacred. When they try to boycott, they're told that that's anti-Semitic. Um, what's left? Um, and they can't give up because they're dying. I don't know how many Palestinians have died in the last year because of bad water, bad food, bad diet, but certainly in the thousands. And so they have to decide: are they going to die, peter out, just be starved to death, or are they going to stand up as men and women and fight for what they believe in?
okay, that leads into the next question. Why did Hamas do this now? Surely they knew that Israel would retaliate.
There's a couple of very good questions embedded in there. Um, First of all, let's take the second part of it. Hamas, from the slide I showed you, Hamas has about 10 to 15,000 operatives. They're, from a military point of view, they're carrying light weapons. They have machine guns. They have some automatic weapons. They have some anti-tank things. They have some mines. But they're facing the most powerful army in the Middle East. Israel has massed now 300,000 people on its borders, hundreds of tanks, missiles. They have um, uh, helicopter gunships. So Hamas, to call this a war, really, is a bit of a stretch of the term war. I mean, it's a massive, massive military power against a comparative handful of men with light weapons. So Hamas had to have known that during the breakout, first of all, it couldn't possibly imagine it was going to take over Israel, not with 2,000 people or something. This was a breakout, a temporary breakout, and they had to also know that there was going to be a massive Israeli retaliation. I don't know whether they knew that it was going to be this much. I don't think so. My guess is that they had intended a smaller operation to go in, kill some soldiers, grab some hostages, and return. But I don't know what's in the Hamas's mind. Clearly, it went off the rails. They started to get in. There were a number of atrocities that were clearly committed. Some hostages were taken. But Grafton, maybe you have a chart there just to say what did happen, what we know about what did happen on the 7th of October. Can you fill us in a bit? I know you and I were talking about that.
Sure, you can. Sure, I can do that if you can
Yeah,
pull up the
I'll
map.
pull up the maps that we're talking about. There. Okay. Okay.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So you can go to
The next slide.
well, you can go to the show mode.
Oh, I'm sorry. uh, I'm screen sharing. It says I'm screen sharing. You're not sharing? Not seeing?
Oh yeah, I see it, but I see your whole screen, not the
Okay.
slideshow itself.
Hang
Yeah,
on for a second.
yeah.
There.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So, what really happened on October the 7th? Well, two things happened on October the 7th. There was a brilliant military operation by Palestinian fighters, and there was a murderous rampage, which included massacres. We know there were massacres, and we know there were about the taking of civilian hostages. But what we know less about is the military operations that took place that day. And I'll just talk a little bit about how that worked. It was a joint operation by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It's estimated there were 1,200 to 1,500 fighters that took part. According to reports, the breakout began at 6:30 at dawn. They flew paragliders over the fence. That's how they managed to break through the barrier. They attacked first. They attacked Israeli communications towers and their automated gun turrets that I think Peter referred to. Once they had disabled these, they were able to actually attack the fence itself. They knocked down sections of it with bulldozers, and then the fighters themselves uh, crossed into Israel in trucks and on motorcycles. And perhaps some of you have seen videos of that. It would appear from reports that they had three primary targets in mind. And I don't know if you've got a pointer that you can point.
Yep.
First one is checkpoint, Eretz checkpoint.
Right. Right.
Peter,
So this
you've
is
been there.
I've been there several times when I go into Gaza from Israel. That's where I go through. It looks like an airport kind of. It's a big hangar with lots of police and stuff like that.
Okay. That's where Israel controls everything that goes in and out of Gaza. And it maintains extensive records on all Palestinians at that point. So that was a key target. The second one is the Nahal Oz military base. That's about a third of the way down. That's where Israeli tanks and bulldozers go in to create their cordon sanitaire, that they maintain a 200 or 300 meter wide strip inside Gaza that they plow, they raise right to the ground. The third, and perhaps their key target, was the Re'im military base, a little further inland. That's the headquarters of the Gaza Command, Israel's Gaza Command headquarters.
Is that the picture we see on the right there?
They successfully, the picture we see on the right is the fighters entering the Nahal Oz military base. And the picture we see on the bottom is a secondary target. That's the Sderot police station,
I see. Okay.
the Israeli border police station.
Right.
So they successfully overran those three military bases. According to reports, 340 Israeli active soldiers and intelligence officers were killed, and an unknown number were captured and taken back into Gaza as prisoners of war. According to the Israeli military, by 10:30 a.m., that is after 4 hours, most of the Palestinian forces that had taken part in this operation had already left and returned to Gaza. It's estimated 1,000 of the 12 to 1,500 fighters were killed during this operation. So that's the military operation. Then, and partly as a result of the wildly unexpected success of that operation, the rest of the day descended into a free-for-all, into total chaos. What happened was that the gaps in the barriers were still open, and all kinds of looters, common onlookers, low-level guerrillas flowed freely into Israel, and some of them picking up discarded weapons and going on a rampage. So the intentional killing of civilians and taking of hostages are war crimes. That must be clearly understood. It must be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent by the International Criminal Court. The issue of potential war crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories is already before the court. It's been there since 2015. They've been collecting information for the past 8 years, but they've done nothing to actually advance the case. And this might be an impetus for them to move more quickly.
Thanks.
It should be noted. Sorry.
Can we just
that could be fine.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make one point that the Canadian government has consistently opposed any International Criminal Court investigation, arguing that since Canada doesn't recognize Palestine, Palestine doesn't have the right to avail itself of the court.
Right. Okay, thanks, Grafton. Thank you for that little historical bit. I see there's still 20 some questions lined up. So what time have we got here? We got Grafton, you're okay if we go till 1:45, for example. You're good for another 25 minutes. If for anybody who wants to stay on asking questions, is that okay with you, Grafton?
Sorry. Grafton. Sorry, I'll unmute myself.
Okay.
Yes, that's okay with me.
Okay. So we'll aim to go till 1:45. Fine. Go ahead. Next question.
Next question. Is Israel guilty of perpetrating genocide on the Palestinian people?
Certainly looks that way. And there are more and more organizations that are coming to that conclusion. If you look up Gaza now, you'll see some UN organizations that come out, a number of human rights organizations. So it certainly feels, when you look at the number of people who are still being killed, I don't think it stretches the term genocide. Now, they're not killing them all, but I think the normal definition of genocide doesn't require to kill everybody, just a lot of people, and they're certainly killing lots and lots of civilians.
Okay. Why is Egypt collaborating with Israel? Why isn't it opening the Rafah border to allow emergency aid? Why is it not supporting the Gaza population?
Right.
Is it true that Egypt has been offered cancellation of its debt if they take in the Gazans as refugees? So that's two separate questions.
Well, if I can just broaden the question a little bit, why haven't the neighboring Arab countries in general done more to help the Palestinians? We would easily assume that fellow Arabs would help out fellow Arabs. But I think to answer that question, you've got to look at what is first of all, the structure of those countries. They're all basically dictatorships, monarchies of one sort or another. They're all very much afraid of Israel. They don't have anything near Israel's power, so they're afraid of Israel. And they all very much depend on the United States for support. So if you take, for example, Sisi, the president of Egypt, came to power in a coup d'etat, defeated with the help of the military, overthrew Mr. Morsi. The Americans aided and abetted that. And so Sisi has to walk a very tight line between the fact that increasingly broad support on the Arab street in Egypt is in favor of the Palestinians, but he has to contend with both the Americans and the Israelis. So he's walking a very tight line there. Now, in the case of Egypt, there is an additional fillip, and that is that you remember when the previous Mubarak, the previous Egyptian dictator, was overthrown, there was a brief interlude in which the Muslim Brotherhood took over. Sisi was very hostile to Muslim Brotherhood. They did terrible things, imprisoned thousands and thousands of them. But he knows that the Hamas is closely aligned with and is actually originally sprang from the Muslim Brotherhood. So the last thing he wants to bring into Egypt is another 2 million people who are politically sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood and therefore unsympathetic to him. And in addition, he would be forced to put guards around them to keep them in their refugee camps. So then he'd be fighting Palestinians who would be attacking him because he's trying to keep them out of control because he's thwarting their right to return. So it's a very difficult proposition for Sisi. Now, is it possible that the Americans have offered a lot of money, or that the Saudis have given a lot of money to allow them in? I don't know. Sorry, that's back private conversation that I'm not aware of. Not impossible.
Thanks, Peter. We've got many questions. Some you have addressed, at least in part already, and so I will skip those. And some I will try and combine. And let me know when you've had enough, and I'll pitch the last one or two to you.
Okay, I think I'm good for another 15 minutes or so. Also,
Okay.
we're still holding steady at the number of participants. So when the numbers start to fade away, then I'll know we're kind of reached our natural time limit. So,
Okay. So why won't the Canadian government take a stand? Why do we consistently side with the United States? Why are they refusing to listen to their citizens who are pushing for a ceasefire?
But I think there's several pieces to that. There certainly are lots of citizens pushing for a ceasefire. There was a big demonstrations all across the country in Canada last weekend. Thousands of people in Montreal and Ottawa and so on. Although if you're looking at it from the government's point of view, maybe the total was, I'll say 10,000 people. I don't know. And when you're looking at 40 million Canadians, so maybe even if those 10,000 people each represented 10 other people, you're looking at 100,000. So still, it's not true that there is a massive overflowing of support in Canada for the ceasefire. There's a lot of support, but this government is going to be very much driven by votes, and so it'll be watching that very much. So I think that we're in a race against the clock. Israel is going to be trying to do as much damage as it can. It watches the barometer rising. The barometer is rising in Canada, and I think it's very important for all of us to be writing to our Prime Minister, writing to our Member of Parliament, asking our friends what they think, because lots of Canadians they're more concerned with what's happening with the senators, they're more concerned with the fate of the Raptors than they are what's going on. So it's certainly in the news, but lots of people don't watch the news too. So I think that if we want to change the calculus, I encourage all the people who are listening to talk to their friends, get a subscription to Al Jazeera. It costs $8 and you get a lot more information. You'll be much more up on what's going on than you would by listening to CBC, which hasn't been terrible, but which is still overwhelmingly reflects the Israeli point of view. I think there's one other issue here, is that from a hard politics point of view, if you're the Prime Minister of Canada, you say, the Israel-Palestine issue is not one that I can do a lot about. We don't have any leverage there. So why would I get the Americans mad at me over it? I think that has to be in the back of the mind of the folks in the PMO trying to navigate Canadian policy. But I think if there was enough demonstrations, enough activism, enough letters, they would change their point of view. And in fact, they've now seem to be changing it a little bit, and I think they can make them change it some more.
Thanks. Follow-up question on Canadian government policy. What is the purpose of Canada's office in Ramallah? What is the office doing since October 7th? Are they just standing by and watching? What is our embassy in Israel doing since October 7th?
I have to say, I can guess, but I don't know. The office in Ramallah has a Facebook page. You can look on it and see what they're doing. The office in Israel has a Facebook page as well. I think our Israeli embassy has mostly spent its time supporting Israel and encouraging Israel. I don't think that will have said anything to criticize the Israeli government. Although maybe once Canada comes out and starts pushing for a ceasefire, then maybe they'll say something. Our office in Ramallah is really an observation post. It runs under pretty strict control from Ottawa. The people who run the office there may be very good people, but they clearly get their direction from the external affairs in Ottawa and from the PMO as well. So I don't think we can count on the Canadian office in Ramallah to intervene much, but it is a source of intelligence. And my experience with them is they've been very helpful to me when I've gone and talked to them and so on.
Thanks. You've already said a few words about the media. There's a follow-up question. What is your assessment of how the media has covered the conflict, including the language being used? So you've already said a few words. If you'd like to add to that,
well, yes,
ahead.
I mean, the Israelis are masters at dealing with the media. And if you look at it from the point of view of CBC, for example, it makes sense to put your reporters, base them in Jerusalem. Now a little bit in Cairo because of what's happening at the border there. If you're in Jerusalem, you live in Jerusalem. You see the Israeli news. You get your press briefings from the Israeli military. You inevitably absorb to a greater or lesser extent, and probably to a greater extent, the Israeli perspective on things. And that's why I think it's useful for people to get it either on your use an app for Al Jazeera, or actually subscribe to Al Jazeera. Keep on watching CBC. I support CBC, but you will get a different perspective from Al Jazeera because they do have more people in Gaza. They have more people in the West Bank. They have more people speak Arabic and so on. So it has to do with the sources, the people that our reporters are surrounded by. I also think that the Israelis in general have much better language skills. The Palestinians are more experienced in talking to other Arabs, and they often use a florid language and rhetoric that doesn't sound right to Canadian ears. When Netanyahu speaks to Canadians, he sounds like us. Even if I'm not at all happy about what he's saying, his cadence, his pronunciation, and so on, his understanding of what we think and what we know and don't know is far superior to that of the Palestinians, who are really babes in the woods on this. I'd say in the last 10 years, I'm encouraged by the fact that there's more and more young Palestinian Americans and Palestinian Canadians who feel comfortable with many have grown up here. They feel comfortable with the English language and understand rights, understand what Canadians know and don't know and think and don't understand about the Middle East. And so they're much better to explain the situation. But for years, the Israelis have had a huge advantage in that area. So those are two of my observations.
What is the difference between a Zionist and other Jews who are not Zionist? Is Israel Zionist?
Well, I'm not well positioned to tell you what a Zionist is. I'll tell you what I think. But what I think is that there are lots of different definitions of Zionism. There's labor Zionism, liberal Zionism, right-wing Zionism, religious Zionism, political Zionism. All these have to do with Zionism is a strain of thinking mostly in Jewish studies. You know, there are Zionists who are not Jewish and there are Jews who are not Zionist, but Zionism is common to most Jews in Canada. What I can say, what I'm referring to when I talk about Zionism is what I think is often described as political Zionism. And that is the notion that the Jewish people need and deserve a state in the Middle East, a Jewish state in the Middle East, and they need it for protection. And that because it's a Jewish state, they get to run it, and the other people who live there are there on sufferance. That's basically what political Zionism is, as I understand it. Now, there are different forms of political Zionism. Some liberal Zionists think, well, we could just be fine with Israel, but not the West Bank. Other Zionists say, no, we need the West Bank as well. So there are lots of different strands there, but the common element in my view, so political Zionism is the notion that there must be a Jewish state. And even if it's done at the expense of the Palestinians, that's too bad, because the terrible history of the Jewish people mean that we have to do this, and we're prepared to do it, even if others don't agree.
Okay, I'm going to try combining a couple of questions because we really are running short. Why are Israelis so supportive of the mass killing of Palestinians? And does the current Israeli government have members who want to drive all Palestinians out of the country?
You're actually probably better able to give specific quotes on that. I think the answer is yes, but I can't, off the top of my head, tell you which Israeli. I mean, the two that are best known are Smotrich and Ben Gvir. But can you add to that, Grafton? Because
I can't give you a direct
yeah,
quote, but we can certainly share that after the webinar.
sure, okay.
There have been Israeli ministers who said that the only thing that should go into Gaza is not food or water or fuel, but only bombs.
The
We
kind
know
of
that,
language that's a bit similar to the only good Indian is a dead Indian kind of
mhm.
talk.
But yes, we can find sources.
Okay. Maybe I'm just going to say, I'm going to again
Mhm.
encourage people who disagree with anything I've said earlier. If you put your question in caps, because I'd like to encourage um, ch challenges. If you have them, I say, I hope you all agree with me, but if you don't, I'm very happy to privilege those kinds of questions.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Peter, because one of our viewers does disagree with my interpretation of the phrase "from the river to the sea." Palestine will be free. Um, I think the viewer says, I think the phrase "from river to the sea" is a clear denial of Israel's legitimate existence. It refers to a state of Palestine returning to its original territory prior to the partition of 1947. So Palestine supporters should not use this slogan. It's counterproductive. Israel is a fact recognized by the UN, and that's what we should deal with, and the non-implementation of the Palestinian state. That is, we should deal with Israel as a fact, as a recognized state, and with the issue that the Palestinian state has not been implemented, as I understand. Um,
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to try to
yeah, I'm going to
take
try
your?
and answer
Okay.
that. And then, what I understand is that it's a call for self-determination within historic Palestine. That does not mean that the Jews uh, who are there have to leave. And it does not mean, what it does mean is that the state will not be a Jewish state in the sense of non-Jews having fewer rights than Jews. That's my understanding of the meaning of that phrase.
Okay. I'm not sure
I
that
hope
will have
that's,
satisfied you, but that's you clarified your position. So
yeah. Um, and I said before, other people that use that chant may have uh, a different motivation.
right. It
But
does strike me that when you watch people in the streets chanting that, I wouldn't be surprised if half of them agree with a two-state solution. I think it's a cry. It's a cry for freedom and equality and so on, without being a specific political program. But some people,
indeed,
yeah. Anyway,
um, one of our audience asks if we could elaborate on evidence that Israel actually promoted Hamas in the past in order to weaken the PA. I think that's something we would have to research and send later, unless you have a.
no, I don't have. The good point. Take a note of that, Grafton. There are two ways. There's quite a bit of criticism of Netanyahu recently by his Israeli opponents, that he was far too indulgent towards Hamas and was actually encouraging Hamas more recently. But those articles have been in Haaretz and so on. They're easy to find. About the encouragement at the beginning, which I believe also to be true. I'll have to search and find the references for that. But I'd be glad to include that in the follow-up email I'll send to all the people who are on this call.
Okay, thank you. Why doesn't the UN do something?
Well, the UN does what the UN is mostly a talking shop. I look at my image, I see I've become very fuzzy somehow. I hope my ideas haven't become fuzzy like my image. The UN is mostly a talking shop. So make resolutions. They can condemn Israel or not, call for a ceasefire or not. The UN doesn't have any force of its own. The only time that the UN is able to act directly in a military sense is when a certain number of countries agree to offer their forces to doing it. So, for example, the UN might go into Africa, for example. UN peacekeepers go in, but that's only if all the Security Council members agree that it should be done, and countries pony up their resources to make it happen. That's not the case now. There are big differences between the different members of the Security Council. So the United States has vetoed several attempts at resolutions at the Security Council. And Russia also, maybe Russia and China, vetoed a resolution because they thought it only or principally was aimed at criticizing Hamas rather than being more even-handed. So that's why the UN has no independent agency. It's a talk shop. If it can get together a consensus of organizations to agree, and if there are countries that are willing to offer their armed forces, then the UN can in fact intervene.
Thank you. I'm going to ask just
Excuse me.
couple more questions before we wrap up. Sorry, I'm just searching for the one. This is something that you perhaps should cover in a little more detail because one of our viewers is confused. Why does Israel have power over Gaza? I thought it was Palestinian.
Well, they conquered Gaza and a lot of other territory in 1967. In the 67 war, they conquered Gaza, and they've had control of it ever since. Now, for a while, they actually had settlers inside Gaza, and then they withdrew the settlers in 2005, but they maintained a military perimeter around it. So they do it because they can and because nobody stops them.
Should I wrap up with?
So I want to wrap up. If we're moving to wrap up, you just come back on, show us your face here for a second. Okay. I'd like to have a couple of things I want to ask people before you go.
Okay, no, I'm just I have one more question.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm going to try and combine several of them.
Okay.
They're all referring to what you might see as the political solution to this. And I'll ask the questions. Is now a propitious time to initiate talks toward a long-term peace and a political agreement? Can Hamas be part of the solution? And I think there may be a third that's related. What should the government of Israel do?
Whoa. Okay. I'm going to give an unsatisfactory answer, I'm afraid, to all those. I mean, I think first of all, the urgent and immediate thing is a ceasefire and resumption of humanitarian aid because people are starving to death in Gaza. If they're not starving, they're being bombed. And I think Mr. Trudeau, I'm glad that he's spending time, his resources helping Canadians get out, but I think a much better approach would be to stop the bombings so that everybody could be safe. So there's the immediate issue of that. Then there's the longer term issue of how is this going to be resolved? And in my view, Israel will not be a normal state until they come to deal with the situation of the Palestinians. As long as the Palestinians are excluded from their homeland, as long as they are militarily repelled, as long as inside Israel they do not have equal rights, as long as in the West Bank they live under a situation of apartheid, Israel will be continually a warlike state, and it will not be a normal state. So those kinds of things have to be addressed. And the way to address it, I think, the state of Israel has to be reconfigured on a new basis. The notion of Jewish supremacy, which is what B'Tselem calls it, that Jews should run the place, that the 7 million Jews should run a territory of 14 million people, is not sustainable. And I think that pressure is going to have to be brought on Israel to renegotiate a constitution. It doesn't mean that the Jews have to leave. It means that if Jews who don't agree with equality can leave, like white South Africans who didn't agree with equality in South Africa could leave. But it has to be a reconfiguration of Israel, in my opinion. And that's going to require a lot of compromises from Palestinians and Israelis, and it's going to require a lot of pressure from the international community. Grafton, I see.
Thank you, Peter.
I see. Yeah. Bring your face up for a second. I just want to, so we can see you as I say, we say goodbye. I have a special request for the people who are on. That would you please, when I send out a follow-up email, I'll send you a link to this discussion, and I will be asking you for feedback, and I mean it in the most sincere way. Did this answer most of your questions? Did it answer none of your questions? Did it answer partially? Did it raise new questions? Would it be useful to do this again? This is something that I'd like to get your feedback on, because I spend a lot of energy trying to talk to Canadians, trying to get the Canadian government to take a more balanced policy on the Israel-Palestine question, and I need your help. So I want to know whether I've encouraged you to do so. The immediate steps that you can take, I encourage you to write to your member of parliament, write to Mr. Trudeau, to opposition leaders, but talk to your friends about it. Find out what they think. And if they are confused or they raise issues you don't know the answers to, let me know. Okay? And I also suggest that you tune in to Al Jazeera, not because I think Al Jazeera is the be-all and the end-all, but it's the best alternative source of information on this. There's lots of other very good social media organizations. Al Jazeera is the biggest mainstream organization, but I will send you some links in a follow-up email as well, and you can look at them. So with that, Grafton, do you have some final words you want to say?
Just to thank you all for attending and being patient with me, and forgive me for not getting to every question. We will keep a record of them, and so they're not lost. And if Peter wants to address any of them in his follow-up email, I'm sure he'll take that opportunity.
I'll be glad. This is an ongoing conversation. So
yes,
and I appreciate the comments from everybody, and including I really appreciate people who ask hard questions and disagree, because it's only through it. I'm wasting my time if I only talk to people who agree with me. It's satisfying, but it doesn't really, not a very good expenditure of my energy. So thank you very much to everybody, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.